Hello there. Tonight, we're stepping into a room that smells of metal, smoke, and something sweetly rotten. You're lying on a wooden table slick with oil. The doctor isn't trying to save you, he's trying to see what happens when he fails. Above you, a torch flickers, throwing orange light across jars filled with shapes that used to be human. He grinds a powder that burns your throat even from across the room, whispering words you don't understand. Your skin prickles as the mixture touches it. Then your body stops listening to you. You can hear your heartbeat slowing. But it doesn't stop. Not yet. Outside, the world will think you're dead. But this man isn't finished with you. Before we begin, leave a like and subscribe if strange corners of history help you drift off to sleep. And tell me your location and the local time in the comments. I love seeing where this quiet circle of night listeners comes from. Now, dim the lights. Let's see how close they came to bringing the dead back to life. Imagine yourself standing in a place where medicine has no smell of antiseptic, no bright white lights, and no quiet hum of machines. Instead, the air is thick with smoke from burning herbs, the sweetness of honey, and the unmistakable sour trace of decay. It is an ancient clinic, though that word might be too generous. A hut of mud bricks and woven reeds, its roof sagging under centuries of heat. The floor beneath your bare feet is cool, hard-packed earth. Someone has traced faded circles in ash near the doorway, protection symbols meant to keep disease spirits from entering. They have not been very successful. You hear coughing before you see the patients. A low, wet chorus that fills the dark like a chant. Dozens of people lie on mats of straw. Some are barely breathing. Others stare at the ceiling with wide, glassy eyes, waiting for something that even the healers can't name. You move carefully through the gloom. In the corner, a physician, or what passes for one, prepares his tools. There are no steel instruments, no glass jars, no gloves, just a bronze knife, dulled by years of sharpening on stone. A bundle of dried herbs, a bowl of dark liquid that could be medicine or poison, or both. He murmurs something under his breath, half prayer, half formula. His hands are steady, but his eyes flick toward the doorway, toward the sun, and life, and all the things that exist outside this room of dying. Because here, in this era before science, every cure is an act of faith. In ancient Egypt, Babylon, or early Greece, doctors were not entirely separate from priests. Their knowledge came from scrolls and dreams, from temple rituals and observation of the stars. They believed sickness was punishment or imbalance, a god's displeasure, or a spirit trapped inside the body. And yet, between superstition and chance, a kind of crude logic began to form. They noticed which herbs soothed fever, which roots numbed pain, which combinations seemed to wake the nearly dead. And sometimes, in their search to bring life back, they stumbled into places where the line between death and recovery blurred. You watch the healer lean over his patient, a man so pale he looks carved from wax. The healer lifts his eyelids with a thumb, studies the clouded pupils, then presses a reed to the man's lips. No breath. He sighs, disappointed but unsurprised. He reaches for a paste made of honey, myrrh, and crushed poppy and smears it across the body's mouth and nostrils. This is not a burial rite. It's another attempt. Because in this world, death is not always final until the body truly begins to fall apart. Outside, flies gather. Children wait with baskets of garlic and onions, payment for the healer's visit. Their mother kneels nearby, whispering a prayer to any god that will listen. And after a moment that could last a lifetime, the dead man's chest rises, just once, shallowly like the echo of a breath. The healer freezes. So does everyone else. And though you know it's only a twitch, the last reflex of a dying brain to them, it is a miracle. He is not dead. He has returned. The line has blurred again. These moments were not rare in the ancient world. Without modern understanding of the body, many who died were not entirely gone. A faint pulse might be missed. A deep coma mistaken for the end. And when the body later stirred, as oxygen and blood briefly returned, the living watched in horror, because they had just buried a man who moved. Imagine the rumors that spread, of the dead who refused to stay dead, of patients who woke on funeral pyres, or stirred after being anointed with strange herbs. Each story traveled, changed, and grew, and soon, what had begun as medical confusion turned into legend, the first whispers of reanimation. But life for the healer was not one of glory. It was a daily grind of failure. Every fever, every wound, every childbirth gone wrong, each was a battle already half lost. The best he could do was delay the inevitable. Most medicine was palliative before the word existed. You treated symptoms, soothed pain, bought a few more hours of hope. The healer's hands were always stained, not from blood, but from the residue of herbs and oils. He wore his knowledge like armor, and his mistakes like ghosts. He learned to look at death without flinching, because in a world without germ theory or anesthesia, the dead were everywhere and always close. Now imagine yourself as one of his assistants. Your task is simple. Keep the fires burning. Grind the herbs, hold down the patient when the pain becomes too much. You've watched people return from the brink, and you've watched them stop breathing mid-prayer. You can't tell which is worse. Sometimes the healer's concoctions are made stronger, mixtures of mandrake, belladonna, and henbane. These plants have power. They numb, paralyze, and sometimes bring hallucinations that feel like prophecy. Too much, and they kill. Too little, and they do nothing. But in the delicate middle ground, they create something uncanny. A state where the body sleeps so deeply, so silently, that even trained eyes might mistake it for death. It's easy to see how accidents happened. Someone would appear lifeless, their breath invisible, their heartbeat too faint to find. They'd be wrapped, buried, mourned, and then, hours or days later, the drug would fade. They would wake in darkness, trapped, pounding on the inside of their coffin. And if by some impossible chance they escaped, they'd emerge pale, cold, eyes wide, lungs gasping for air that had almost forgotten them. What do you think their neighbors called them? To live in the ancient world was to live constantly beside death, and occasionally to see it lose its grip. Even physicians couldn't decide what defined the end of life. They felt for breath, for warmth, for the whisper of a soul. But there was no sure test, no heartbeat monitor, no brain scan. Just the flicker of a candle held to the lips, and the uneasy silence that followed. It wasn't always failure. There were small victories. Honey and wine cleaned wounds. Garlic reduced infection. Vinegar soothed the skin. Even mold, though no one knew why, sometimes cured the sick instead of killing them. These small successes were enough to keep the healers going. They believed they were fighting death itself. And in a way, they were. You picture one of them now, an old Greek physician, bent over his patient. He's seen too many winters. His hands tremble as he pours warm oil into a clay lamp, the light flickering across walls painted with fading symbols. He speaks to his apprentice, describing the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. The balance of life, he says, lies in keeping them equal. Too much black bile, and melancholy sets in. Too much blood, and fever takes hold. His voice is weary, but calm. He has explained this 1,000 times, and yet every case is different. The patient before him is barely breathing. The doctor pricks his arm, lets a few drops of blood fall into a bowl. He nods, satisfied. He believes he has restored balance. Tomorrow, the man will either wake or not, and the doctor will take credit either way. Because survival means his treatment worked. Death means the gods were displeased. That was the comfort of medicine before science. Every outcome could be explained. You can almost hear the rhythm of that life, the daily mixture of faith and failure, the scraping of mortar and pestle, the hiss of heated bronze, the whisper of prayers to Asclepius or Isis, or whichever god was listening that day. Each patient a lesson, each death a teacher, and somewhere within all that fumbling and repetition, a seed of understanding began to grow. The healers didn't know it, but their experiments, their attempts to wake the dying, would one day inspire far stranger tales. Because when you mix medicine, religion, and fear of death, something uncanny always takes shape. A story begins to form of the body that moves without spirit, of life returned without soul. The first, accidental zombie. Outside, night settles over the village. You can hear the faint beat of drums from a nearby temple, calling for protection against plague. The healer extinguishes his lamp and sits beside the door. He looks tired, but not defeated. Tomorrow will bring new patients, new prayers, new failures, and perhaps another miracle that will terrify more than it comforts. The world sleeps lightly in these centuries, always half between waking and death. And as you listen to the distant coughing fade, you realize that in their fumbling way, these ancient doctors weren't just trying to save lives. They were teaching humanity to fear what happens when life refuses to leave. You stay a little longer in that room of flickering shadows. The healer has fallen asleep, sitting upright, his back against the wall. Beside him, the patient, the one who stirred, who took that strange single breath, lies still again. For a moment, you almost think the miracle has faded. But then, his fingers twitch, just barely. And though no one else notices, you do. It's unsettling how familiar that tiny motion feels. That stubborn refusal to give up. Humanity has always been like that, dragging itself back from the brink, half dead but unwilling to stop moving. In a way, this is where the zombie myth begins. Not with monsters, not with curses, but with ordinary people so desperate to live that they confused life's remnants for resurrection. Step outside for a breath of cooler air. The sky above the settlement is low and dust-colored, and smoke from hearth fires drifts in lazy threads across the horizon. You can smell the coppery tang of burnt offerings from the temple down the road, sacrifices to keep pestilence at bay. Somewhere, a goat bleats. Somewhere else, a child cries out in fevered sleep. The entire landscape feels sick, as though the world itself were trying to heal and failing. You find yourself wondering how anyone managed hope. But they did. They had to. Because without hope, they had only the smell of rot and the certainty of another dawn filled with coughing. In the center of town, the healer's apprentices are at work. They grind bark and roots on flat stones, adding water until the mixture forms a gritty paste. One young boy ties thin cords of linen around small bundles of herbs, while another tends a pot of oil simmering over coals. Each ingredient is precious, gathered from hills and riverbanks, traded with travelers, remembered through half-forgotten recipes, scratched onto clay tablets. The rhythm of this work is slow, repetitive, and oddly soothing. You can almost hear the scrape of stone on stone. The master healer stirs, emerging from the doorway. His eyes are bleary but sharp. He inspects the mixtures one by one, muttering about humors and balance. Then, without a word, he gestures toward a new patient being carried in on a litter. The man is limp, his lips blue. The crowd murmurs prayers, some pleading, others already mourning. The healer doesn't rush. He orders the body placed near the fire, instructs his students to fetch vinegar and cloths. They clean the man's face, then rub his limbs to coax warmth back into them. The smell of vinegar cuts through the air, sharp and oddly clean. He leans close, listens. No sound. He takes the dull bronze knife, nicks the man's ear, waits. A moment later, a single drop of blood wells up. The healer nods. Still fluid. Still hope. To the people watching, this looks like a ritual. But to him, it is an experiment. He adds a touch of honey to the man's mouth, presses fingers to his chest, then whispers something too soft to catch. The minutes pass slowly, punctuated by the crackle of the fire. And then, another twitch. The man's eyelids flutter. A murmur ripples through the crowd. Was he revived, or had he never been gone? No one can say. But by nightfall, the story will spread. The healer has brought another soul back. And in every retelling, the dead become a little deader, the miracle a little larger. It's easy to forget how fragile the boundaries were back then. Without the language of science, the world was explained by proximity, life beside death, spirit beside flesh. When you saw movement where there should have been stillness, you didn't reach for physiology. You reached for the divine, or the cursed. Across cultures, this same confusion took shape in different forms. In Mesopotamia, sickness was said to be caused by ghosts, those who had died without proper burial, wandering and angry. In Egypt, the soul was a composite thing. Parts could leave the body while others remained, still clinging to life. In early Greece, philosophers argued over what death truly meant. Some said the soul left the body at the final breath. Others believed it lingered until decay began. If you happened to wake too soon, you became proof that death was negotiable. It's strange to think of medicine and mysticism as siblings, but they were. Each sought to explain the same mysteries with the tools available: herbs, chance, observation, faith. A doctor might recommend a poultice one moment and a prayer the next. A priest might use incense to drive out demons, only to find that the smoke soothed the lungs by accident. Trial and error, faith and failure, science in its cradle. Evening deepens. The fires burn lower. The healer's hut glows like an ember in the darkness. Inside, the air is heavy but calmer now. The revived man sleeps uneasily, his breath shallow but steady. One apprentice whispers that he saw the man's eyes roll back white before the twitch. Another swears the body stiffened first, like a corpse in rigor, and only then softened again. They argue in hushed tones, afraid of waking him. Their master listens, saying nothing. He has seen this before too many times. He knows some will live and some will not. He knows that when they die again, it will seem stranger, harder, as if they'd cheated death once and now must pay double. Still, he keeps his notes, crude and smudged, etched into wax tablets. He records the mixtures used, the temperatures, the times of revival. He doesn't know it, but he is performing one of humanity's first medical experiments. And the results are terrifyingly ambiguous. Step back now, outside into the night again. The air is cooler. A distant jackal cries. The stars burn steadily overhead, indifferent witnesses to all of this. Somewhere, a funeral procession moves through the streets. They carry torches and sing low hymns. One of the mourners glances toward the healer's house and mutters something about disturbing the natural order, because every resurrection demands a price. When you bring someone back, even by accident, you challenge the quiet authority of the grave. You watch as the procession passes and the torches vanish into the dark. You can almost feel how thin the veil is between belief and science, between miracle and misunderstanding. And though the night is still, there's an unease that lingers, a soft, persistent thought. If people could return once, how many already had? That question will echo for centuries. But for now, the healer stokes his fire again and begins grinding more herbs. He's not chasing immortality, he's chasing understanding. Still, the effect is the same. Every experiment brings him closer to the impossible. Every success blurs the line a little further. And in that slow confusion, something new is born. Not yet a legend, not yet a horror story, just an observation whispered through time. That life, when interrupted, sometimes tries to resume itself. That death, when misjudged, can look a lot like resurrection. In this dim age, that truth is both comforting and dreadful, because it means the healer's world is not divided neatly between living and dead. It's a place where the body may sleep deeper than anyone realizes. A place where, if you listen closely in the silence of night, you might hear someone breathing who shouldn't be. You linger in that silence. The faint breathing of the half-dead man merges with the slow sigh of the coals. Outside, the night is patient. Dogs bark far away, their voices carrying over the flat roofs and the dry riverbed beyond the village. Somewhere, a woman hums a lullaby, low and trembling, to a child who will not sleep. The healer listens to it for a while, the melody simple, older than language. He reaches for a wax tablet and scratches a single line. Life returns where it should not. Then he sets the stylus aside and lets the words cool in the darkness. In the morning, the air is bright again. Dust motes drift like tiny suns through the open doorway. The patient has risen. He sits on his mat, confused, throat dry, staring at the light as though it were a stranger. The healer offers him water. The man drinks, coughs once, and smiles faintly. Around them, the apprentices stare in awe. They will spend the rest of the day repeating the story to anyone who will listen. By evening, it will already be legend. By the end of the week, it will be miracle. And somewhere down the line, after centuries of retelling, it will sound like magic. But you have seen the truth of it. It was only the body fighting to remember itself. The healer cleans his tools and steps outside. The smell of morning fires hangs in the air. Bread baking, onions sizzling in oil, smoke carrying upward into a sky so pale it looks washed clean. He walks toward the temple district where others like him gather. Men and women with satchels of herbs, amulets strung around their necks, small jars of mysterious powders swinging from their belts. They greet one another quietly, like soldiers who have survived the same battle. They discuss new cases. A farmer who fell into a trance after a snake bite. A girl who slept for 3 days after inhaling the smoke of burning lotus. A man who stopped breathing but woke again when his body was placed in the sun. Each tale becomes another fragment in the puzzle of life and death. No one calls it research. No one writes books or claims discovery. They simply repeat what has happened, each story carrying a faint echo of fear, because every revival brings a question none of them can answer. If a person can leave the body and then return, what exactly happens in between? And if you can wake a soul once, could you do it again? Could you choose who comes back and who stays gone? The healers don't speak of such things openly. There are temples for that sort of talk. Dark, windowless rooms where priests chant through the night, calling on gods of death and rebirth. Sometimes the healers are invited to watch. They stand in the shadows while incense thickens the air and bodies are anointed with oils. They see the same twitch, the same flutter of movement, and they feel the same mixture of awe and dread. They whisper to themselves that it's only muscle reflex. And yet, they don't quite believe it. Weeks pass. The patient who returned from death recovers, though something about him feels different. He moves slower. His voice is softer, as though part of him were still somewhere else. People begin to cross the street when he walks by. Children point and whisper. The healer defends him, says he's only weak from illness. But when the man laughs, even the healer feels uneasy. There's no joy in it, only the hollow sound of air leaving a vessel. It's this unease that will feed the stories. In a world without explanation, mystery breeds monsters. The villagers will tell one another that the revived man doesn't sleep, that food has no taste for him, that animals shy away. They'll say his soul never fully returned, that something else borrowed his body. And the healer, though he denies it, will keep a lamp burning through the night just in case. Still, life goes on. New fevers rise, new wounds need tending. The healer's apprentices collect plants by moonlight, grind them into dust, and label each jar with marks only they understand. The cycle of sickness and cure continues, slow, repetitive, strangely rhythmic, and you begin to sense how this rhythm must have sounded to those who lived it. The scrape of stone, the murmur of prayers, the rustle of cloth, a heartbeat that belongs to an entire civilization. For centuries, this was the soundtrack of healing, a steady attempt to bargain with death. And in that bargaining, knowledge crept forward in inches. They learned that honey preserved flesh, that willow bark eased pain, that opium quieted the mind so completely that the body seemed to vanish. They didn't know the chemistry, but they knew the effect. And in trying to mimic the boundary between sleep and death, they occasionally erased it. That's what made these early healers both revered and feared. They worked with forces invisible and intimate. They handled the breath of life as though it were a material thing. When they failed, people died. When they succeeded, people questioned whether they should have. Now imagine lying on one of their mats, the air heavy with herbs, your heartbeat faint but steady. You slip into a sleep so deep it feels endless. You dream of warmth, then of cold, then of nothing at all. When you wake, the room smells of fire and sweat. Your limbs are heavy. Faces lean over you in disbelief. You try to speak, but only a rasp escapes. Someone crosses themselves. Someone else runs. And though you're alive, you realize you've become a story. That is how it begins, not with infection or curses, but with misunderstanding. A moment when life outlasts the signs that measure it, a breath mistaken for silence, a heart that rests before it beats again, a man who returns home to find his own grave waiting. The healer doesn't see monsters. He sees anomalies, cases that defy his limited rules. But the people see the walking dead. And as the centuries turn, those stories will drift across deserts, through temples, into the imaginations of philosophers and priests. Each time retold, each time a little darker. By the time they reach the next age, they will no longer be about medicine at all. They will be about fear. Fear of death undone. Fear of the unknown spark that keeps the body moving after the soul has gone. The sun sinks low again, red and hazy, lighting the dust like blood and water. The healer sits outside his hut, watching it disappear behind the hills. He thinks of the man who woke and the silence that followed. He wonders whether he saved him or cursed him. Then he closes his eyes and listens to the night filling up with insects and wind. The world exhales. For now, death is still winning. The night deepens again. The healer's lamp burns low, a single trembling flame reflected in the glaze of his medicine bowl. Around him, the world settles into its familiar silence, the hush that follows effort, the soft surrender after another day of trying to hold back the tide. Somewhere beyond the walls, a dog howls, then stops, as though the sound itself has remembered the futility of being heard. He breathes slowly, steadying his hands over the flicker of light. The patient who once returned from the brink now sleeps soundly, no different from anyone else. But the healer cannot help watching the rise and fall of the man's chest, waiting for proof that it will keep happening. He knows he will do this again tomorrow, and the next day, and every day after that, until his own breath falters and another apprentice sits where he sits now. You stand in the doorway, watching him. In the smoke and dimness, he looks like part of the building itself. Stone, shadow, and resolve. There's nothing dramatic in this scene. Just a man, a lamp, and the endless human habit of refusing to accept death's final word. Outside, the wind shifts. It carries with it the smell of dust, herbs, and something faintly metallic, the scent of work unfinished. And as the flame gutters and the last patient exhales into sleep, you realize that this quiet persistence, this need to wake the unwakeable, is older than memory. The ancient doctors never set out to make monsters. They were only trying to help. But somewhere between mercy and mistake, they began a story that would never quite die. And in the centuries to come, one man will take that story further than anyone dared, a physician who will not let death win. Morning light creeps through the cracks of a stone wall. The year is far ahead now, centuries after that nameless healer watched his patient breathe again. Empires have risen. Gods have changed names. And yet, death remains undefeated. But in this age, somewhere between faith and philosophy, one man begins to wonder if that defeat is permanent. His name will be forgotten by most, but his work will not. He is one of those early physicians who stand awkwardly between two worlds, one foot still in superstition, the other tentatively in science. He has seen too many bodies go still, and too many of them stir again. He does not want to pray about it anymore. He wants to understand. Imagine him in his chamber, not a temple now, but a small stone room lined with jars and scrolls. The air smells of vinegar, oil, and something faintly medicinal like burnt rosemary. On his desk, wax tablets record a meticulous, obsessive catalog of the dying and the nearly dead. Next to them lies a bronze scalpel, cleaned and sharpened so often that the edge reflects light like water. He sits beside it with his hands clasped, not praying, only thinking. His students whisper that he has no fear of the dead. They say he touches corpses without flinching, cuts them open to see how breath leaves the body. That he has watched the eyes cloud, then clear again for reasons no one can explain. To some, this makes him a genius. To others, a heretic. He tells them that life is a fire, and that fire must have fuel. If you can learn what feeds it, perhaps you can relight it. The idea is simple, almost poetic, but in the world he lives in, it borders on blasphemy. Outside his city, the streets are still ruled by ritual. When someone dies, their house is sealed for days. Salt is sprinkled on the thresholds, prayers recited to keep restless spirits from returning. The physician ignores all that. He believes that what people call spirits are only misunderstandings, trapped air, stiffening muscles, the twitch of nerves that refuse to accept stillness. And yet, even he cannot deny the strange truth. Sometimes those twitches look like intention. Sometimes the dead seem to change their minds. He writes, "Life departs not as a bird, but as smoke. It lingers." And then he begins to test the air. He builds small contraptions of reeds and cloth, trying to measure breath as it fades. He holds mirrors before the mouths of the dying to see if condensation appears. He counts heartbeats, pressing his ear to the chest, marking time with the rhythm of his own pulse. Every failure frustrates him, but every tiny movement fascinates him more. One evening, a messenger arrives. A nobleman's son has collapsed during a feast. The physician gathers his tools, the same worn satchel he's carried for 20 years, and follows the messenger through the crowded streets. The noble's house is vast, its walls whitewashed and silent. In the great hall, a dozen candles burn around a single body. The boy lies motionless, face waxy, eyes half open. The family kneels nearby, weeping quietly. A priest has already been summoned. He stands ready to close the eyes and seal the mouth. But the physician waves him aside. He bends low, listening, then presses his fingers to the boy's neck. He feels nothing. Yet something about the jaw, the tension there, troubles him. He orders warm cloths, oil, and a basin of wine. The family protests. The priest hisses that this is sacrilege. The physician doesn't answer. He rubs the boy's chest, massages his limbs, murmuring under his breath, not prayers, but instructions to himself. When the skin begins to flush, he leans close, blows air into the boy's mouth, presses the chest again and again. It's not quite resuscitation as we know it, but it's close. The body rocks under the pressure, then stops, then moves again, then moves again. The priest gasps. The mother clutches her face. The boy coughs. Just once, a soft, wet sound that shatters the silence. His eyes flutter, his lips part, and a shallow breath trembles out. He is alive. For a moment, the hall erupts in noise. The family praises the gods. The priest falls to his knees, whispering in confusion. But the physician just sits back, exhausted. He does not celebrate. He is already thinking. The next morning, he returns to his study and writes by the light of a single lamp. Air is life. Movement is life. To return either is to return both. He doesn't know it yet, but he has stumbled into the edge of truth, the idea that the body is a machine that can, for a time, be restarted. But in the eyes of his world, he has done something unspeakable. He has trespassed in the realm of gods. Rumors spread fast. Some call him the breath thief. Others whisper that he consorts with spirits. Children cross themselves when he passes. Yet behind closed doors, the wealthy send for him when illness comes. They don't believe in his philosophy, but they believe in results. He begins to study those who hover between life and death, fever victims, snakebite survivors, the drowned. He measures how long they can go without breathing, how their bodies react to heat, to cold, to certain herbs. Sometimes he brings them back. Sometimes he doesn't. But each attempt deepens his obsession. He wonders what separates a living body from a corpse. Is it soul, heat, breath, or something else? Something that can be manipulated. He notices that warmth lingers in the body long after the breath stops. That nerves twitch under certain oils. That some plants, when crushed and inhaled, cause muscles to spasm violently. He begins to mix those plants together. Curious. The result is unpredictable, sometimes paralyzing, sometimes rousing. One concoction, made from hemlock and belladonna, slows the pulse to near stillness. Another, blended with mint and resin, quickens it again. He keeps experimenting, never satisfied. At times, he feels he is close to unlocking something enormous. At others, he feels madness creeping in. He dreams of faces half awake, eyes staring, mouths murmuring words that make no sense. He wakes drenched in sweat, unsure if the sound in his ears is breathing or imagination. Still, he cannot stop. He writes to other scholars, begging them to observe his methods. Most refuse. A few come and leave pale and shaken. One warns him that he's playing with forces older than reason. The physician only nods. He already knows. Months pass, then years. He grows thinner, his hands unsteady, his sleep broken. But his conviction hardens. He believes that death is not an instant, but a process, a slow unraveling that can be interrupted. He calls it the window of return. It is small, he says, but real, and he means to widen it. One night, a storm rolls across the city. Thunder shakes the shutters. Rain lashes the streets. A cart arrives at the physician's door, bearing another body, a soldier struck by lightning. The skin is pale, the limbs stiff. The smell of ozone lingers in the air. The messenger begs for a miracle. The physician nods, wordless. He has been waiting for this. Lightning, he thinks, is the god's own spark. If death is an extinguished flame, then perhaps this man carries the ember still. He sets to work. He warms the body near the fire, massages the limbs, applies his oils. Nothing. He draws a mixture of crushed herbs and presses it beneath the soldier's tongue. Still nothing. He waits, watching the lips for any flicker. And then, faintly, a sound, a deep rasping intake of air. The body convulses. The head jerks back. The eyes fly open. For an instant, the man looks alive. Horribly, vividly alive. Then stillness returns. The physician's lamp trembles in his shaking hand. He whispers, "I saw him breathe." But the city will remember it differently. They will say he reanimated a corpse. They will say the dead soldier rose, eyes shining with unnatural fire, before collapsing again. The story will spread, embellished and distorted, until it becomes impossible to separate science from sorcery. In time, his house will be raided, his scrolls burned. He will vanish, leaving behind only fragments, quotations in later texts, half-remembered rumors, legends of a doctor who could wake the dead. And yet, what he learned will survive. The idea that death is not absolute, that life can flicker, pause, and under the right hands, resume. Others will pick up that thought, refine it, twist it. Some will use it to heal, others will use it to frighten, and centuries later, it will feed the imagination of every story about the walking dead. For now, though, the physician sleeps, finally, deeply. His tools lie scattered across the table, the air still heavy with the scent of herbs. Outside, dawn breaks pale and uncertain. The world continues as if nothing happened. But something has changed. A boundary has shifted, if only by a breath. You can almost see him there in that pale dawn, a man worn thin by his own curiosity, hunched over the desk where smoke still curls from the lamp wick. His fingers tremble slightly as he dips a quill into ink, careful not to spill. He writes down what he witnessed in words as plain as possible, as if simplicity could protect him from disbelief. The chest rose once more. I observed a return of motion and air. He adds nothing else. No claim, no triumph. Only observation. Because he knows already that to the world beyond his room, these words are dangerous. Outside, the city wakes to its usual rhythm. Market stalls open. Children run through puddles left by the storm. From the hills, smoke rises from funeral pyres where others, less fortunate, are being returned to the gods. No one knows that in a quiet stone house at the edge of the city, a physician has just touched the border between myth and medicine. He eats little that day. His mind wanders. He watches the way steam curls off a bowl of broth, trying to imagine how air moves within the body. He cuts open small animals after they die, measuring how long muscles twitch, how heat escapes, how stillness spreads. His students find him cold and unsettling now. One leaves without a word. Another refuses to touch his instruments. He does not notice. At night, he sits beside the open window, letting the wind cool his face. He listens to the city's faint noises, cartwheels, dogs, the hum of people who think they understand their world. He knows he's gone too far to stop. If he ends his work now, he'll never know how close he came. And so, quietly, he begins a new phase of study. He no longer waits for patients. He looks for them. He visits execution sites and battlefields, bribing guards for access to the newly dead. He studies the moments immediately after death, the faint warmth of skin, the invisible tremor of nerves, the soft sigh that escapes when the lungs collapse. He's looking for something consistent, a clue hidden in the pattern of fading life. And one night, among the fallen soldiers of a skirmish, he thinks he finds it. A man with a wound to the leg, not mortal but enough to fell him, lies half buried in mud. His lips are blue, his chest unmoving. But when the physician presses a finger to the throat, he feels something. Not quite a pulse, not quite nothing. He works quickly, rubbing the limbs, pouring wine into the mouth, sealing the wound with hot iron. And for a fleeting instant, the body spasms. A low groan escapes it, barely human, more like the sound of air forced through a bellows. The eyes open. They fix on him. And then, nothing. The physician kneels there in the silence, his hands slick with mud and wine. He whispers to himself, he wanted to return. When he goes home that night, he cannot sleep. The image follows him, the eyes, the sound, the strange expression that was neither pain nor peace. He begins to think that he hasn't discovered something new at all, only rediscovered something ancient, something the old temple healers already knew, something they wrapped in prayer to disguise their fear. In the weeks that follow, he writes furiously. He describes death as a slow departure, a tide receding from the shore. He argues that perhaps, for a few moments, that tide can be called back. He knows the church would condemn this. But he writes anyway, because he can feel time slipping past, and he wants the next generation to start where he ends. One evening, his last remaining apprentice, a cautious young man named Dorian, enters the study carrying a sealed letter. It's from a council of physicians. They have heard of his experiments. They demand an explanation. The old doctor reads it once, twice, then sets it down. He looks at Dorian, eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights. "Do you believe," he asks, "that the soul leaves instantly?" Dorian hesitates. The priests say yes. "And you?" "I don't know." The old man nods slowly. Then there is hope. He burns the letter. The ashes rise in the lamplight, curling like smoke from a breath extinguished too soon. From then on, he works only at night. He moves through his house like a ghost, whispering notes to himself. Neighbors hear strange sounds, scraping, rhythmic tapping, the faint hum of chanting, though he prays to no one. Sometimes, through a gap in the shutters, they glimpse a flickering silhouette bending over a table. They say he has lost his mind. They are not entirely wrong. Months later, he falls ill. The apprentices find him collapsed beside his desk, the ink still wet beneath his hand. He's feverish, muttering nonsense. They lay him on a cot and wait. He tells them not to summon the priests. Instead, he gives Dorian a final instruction. "If I stop breathing, don't let it end there." And then he sleeps. For hours, his chest rises and falls unevenly, then slower, then stops. The apprentices weep quietly. Dorian sits beside the body, trembling. He remembers the old man's words. Don't let it end there. He waits. 5 minutes, you believe 10. Then he leans over, presses his hands against the chest, and forces air into the mouth. Nothing. He tries again. Again. The other apprentice begs him to stop. But Dorian keeps going, whispering the same phrase under his breath. Return, return, return. And then the faintest sound, a rattle, deep inside the throat. The old man's body jerks once, violently. His eyes fly open. The apprentices scream. Dorian stumbles back, hand over his mouth. The eyes move. They fix on him. For an endless moment, they are aware. Then they close again. The breath leaves for good. When it's over, the apprentices say nothing. They wrap the body in linen and carry it away before dawn. But Dorian cannot forget what he saw, that spark, that impossible return. He writes it down years later in a trembling hand. He rose between breaths. Those words will survive long after both of them are gone. They'll be copied, misquoted, translated, absorbed into medical texts and superstitious tracts. Some will call it proof that the soul can be recalled. Others will call it madness. But one idea will persist, that life once taken might still be persuaded to return. And in that fragile belief, half hope, half horror, the seed of the zombie is planted again. Not through infection, or curses, or dark rituals, but through the simplest human impulse, the refusal to accept that death means done. Dorian grows old. He becomes a healer himself. He no longer experiments, but every time a patient dies, he waits a little longer before declaring it. He watches the lips, listens for that faint, impossible sound, and every once in a while, he swears he hears it, the whisper of air returning. He never speaks of it aloud. Years later, when he is buried, his students find the old master's notebooks hidden in a sealed jar. The pages are brittle, the ink faded, but one line remains clear, pressed so deep into the wax that it never fades. To wake the dead, one must first mistake them for the living. The handwriting is steady, careful, and though centuries will pass, the meaning will echo, whispered through laboratories, through folklore, through every fearful story told in candlelight. That life, when prodded, sometimes remembers itself, and that the dead, once disturbed, rarely rest quietly. Outside, the world keeps changing. Science marches forward. Empires fall, but somewhere in every generation, a curious mind sits before a silent body and wonders, what if it isn't really over? That thought, quiet and ancient, is how medicine first learned to play God, and how the dream of defeating death became the shadow that still walks beside it. He doesn't know it, of course. No one ever does, but his story will not end in that quiet grave. The city changes, the names of its gods fade, and generations pass like the pages of a worn book. Yet somewhere, the old physician's ideas persist, copied, misremembered, disguised beneath layers of superstition and awe. Every age rediscovers him in a different form. In the centuries that follow, his notes drift across the Mediterranean like rumors carried on salt wind. A fragment is found in Alexandria, annotated by a scholar who claims to have seen a man revived with heated oils. Another appears in Carthage, cited in a treatise on the breath of divinity. The names change: Theophrastus, Apollonius, maybe even Galen, but the thought remains the same, that life can pause, that perhaps, under the right hands, it can be coaxed back. And where medicine hesitates, religion begins to take over. Priests and philosophers recite his words as prayers. They describe the breath as the soul's tether, the spark that ties clay to spirit. They perform experiments under temple ceilings painted with stars, whispering his lines like incantations. When they succeed, they call it miracle. When they fail, they bury the evidence and call it mystery. You can imagine one of these temples, its columns heavy with incense smoke, its floors cold beneath bare feet. An acolyte kneels beside a marble slab where a body lies, newly dead. He crushes herbs in a bronze mortar, repeating phrases that once belonged to a physician's observations. He doesn't understand them, not really. But the rhythm comforts him, and rhythm is its own kind of power. He smears the paste on the lips, on the eyelids, on the heart. He waits. The candle flickers. A tiny muscle in the hand moves. He gasps. He believes. And just like that, science becomes ritual again. The idea spreads like smoke. Invisible, unstoppable. In Greece, it becomes philosophy. In Rome, spectacle. There are accounts of healers who perform demonstrations in public, reviving birds and small animals with clever tricks of heat and timing. The crowd calls them gods. The Senate calls them frauds. But the fascination grows. Every empire that inherits the physician's shadow tries to explain it in its own language. None can. And so the myth deepens. The physician becomes a symbol, not a man, but a story about defiance. The one who crossed the line and came back with proof that death is only an interval. He gains titles over time. The one who borrowed breath, the temper of Hades, the man who stole a moment from eternity. His legend begins to look less like medicine and more like resurrection. Centuries later, in the decaying libraries of Byzantium, a monk copies an ancient fragment into the margin of a prayer book. He doesn't know its source. He writes, "Where heat remains, life hides, stir it, and it returns." Then he crosses himself twice, uneasy, because even to read those words feels like trespassing. That fragment survives the fires of conquest, the fall of empires, the slow erosion of parchment into dust. It finds its way to medieval scholars who puzzle over it in candlelight. They read about the window of return and wonder if it might explain the stories told in the villages, tales of the half-dead, the sleepers who wake after burial, the mourners who hear knocking from beneath the earth. It gives their fear a name. It gives their ghosts a cause. And somewhere deep in a monastery scriptorium, a copyist looks up from the page and whispers, "They said he only wanted to help." The others fall silent, each thinking of the same thing, the last face they saw before the lids closed, the last breath they swore they felt but weren't sure. The line between medicine and miracle remains narrow, trembling. Too much faith, and it collapses into magic. Too much reason, and it becomes cruelty. The old physician walked it without meaning to, and every healer since has followed his footprints. Even now, his ghost lingers, not haunting with fear, but with questions. How far can compassion go before it becomes hubris? What happens when the healer forgets that death, too, has a purpose? Outside, rain begins to fall on the city roofs. It hisses down the gutters, soft and unhurried. It sounds like breath. And for a fleeting moment, you understand the temptation that drove him, that fragile, trembling hope that maybe, just maybe, the end could be delayed one more time. He didn't set out to create legends or monsters. He only wanted to save someone, anyone, from the quiet he'd seen too often. But the world took his mercy and gave it teeth. And in doing so, it created the perfect story of the man who tried to heal death and instead taught it to walk. The candlelight fades. The rain slows. The echo of his quill still scratches faintly across history, somewhere between science and myth. And through that faint sound, the next chapter of the story begins, not in laboratories or libraries, but in tombs and temples, where ritual replaces reason and the dream of resurrection becomes something older, stranger, and far less human. The story drifts now into the shadows of older worlds, places where medicine ends and magic begins. The physician's notes are long gone, his name forgotten, yet the echo of his work travels on, reshaped by fear and wonder. Each civilization picks it up, adds its own colors, its own gods, its own reasons for why the dead sometimes refuse to stay still. Imagine walking through a temple complex somewhere along the Nile. The air smells of resin and salt. It's night, but torches burn in tall bronze stands, their flames trembling against carved walls. Hieroglyphs tell stories of journeys through the underworld, the weighing of the heart, the long voyage beneath the stars. But in one small chamber, hidden behind veils of linen, something stranger is happening. A priest kneels beside a wooden table. On it lies the body of a man, pale from the embalmer's salt, chest opened, empty. The priest murmurs to himself as he mixes a paste of honey, natron, and crushed herbs. Each motion is slow, careful. He dips a brush made of reeds into the mixture and paints it along the skin. The body glistens in the torchlight, as though sweating. Then he leans close, whispering into the ear of the dead. No one else is allowed to hear what he says. The words are older than language, the same rhythm used by healers long before him. Perhaps even the physician, whose shadow still lingers here. To the living, this is ritual. But to the priest, it's something more precise, almost an experiment. He believes the soul can be coaxed into returning, not permanently, but for a moment. Just long enough to answer questions, to give signs, to prove that death is a doorway and not a wall. He lights a mixture of incense and myrrh, the smoke curling upward like a serpent. It fills the room thick and sweet, and the priest begins to sway. To him, it's not poison, but a bridge, something that thins the air between this world and the next. He chants, and as he does, he watches the body's fingers. He swears they move, just slightly, just once. Enough to make him bow his head in reverence and fear. In ancient Egypt, such moments were common enough to be written down. The rituals of mummification were not only about preservation, they were also about imitation. By preserving the body, they hoped to preserve the soul's memory of it. And sometimes, when the priests anointed the lips with oils or bound the limbs with charms, they claimed the dead responded. A twitch, a breath, a sigh that could be heard only by those who believed. They called it the second wind. Today, we'd call it a reflex. But then, it was proof that life could return. The same pattern unfolds elsewhere. Far across the sea in the hills of Thessaly, Greek philosophers debate the difference between sleep and death. To them, both are temporary departures of the soul. They practice experiments of their own, inhaling fumes from caves, entering trances so deep that their bodies grow cold and still. When they wake, they claim to have walked the lands of the dead and returned with knowledge. Some believe them. Others whisper that they're possessed. Even Hippocrates, the father of rational medicine, records strange accounts. Patients declared dead who later recover, fever victims who stop breathing, then stir hours later. He doesn't call it magic. He calls it the return of heat. But when those same tales reach the temples, the priests have other words for it. Divine reanimation, borrowed breath. It's the same old story, clothed in new robes. Then there are the darker corners of the world, places where ritual isn't written but remembered. In the humid forests of West Africa, tribes speak of powders that still the body without ending it. A mixture of ground fish, roots, and toxins that mimic death so perfectly that even the elders are deceived. Hours later, the victim wakes dazed, confused, half remembering their burial. The healers call it cleansing, a way to brush against death and return wiser. Their enemies call it witchcraft. And centuries later, when those practices travel across oceans, the word changes again. It becomes zombie. But long before that word exists, the idea already does. Across ancient Persia, there are tales of magi who whisper life into clay figures. In Mesopotamia, scribes describe rituals to call back the spirit of the unburied. Each culture shapes the same yearning into its own language, to command the border between life and death. Imagine an ancient physician walking among them, centuries after his own death. He would recognize their tools, the herbs, the oils, the careful timing. He would recognize their faces, the same look of concentration, the same hope, the same disbelief when the impossible happens. He might even smile, tiredly, because he would see himself in their prayers. In Greece, the myth of Asclepius, the god of healing, tells of a physician so skilled he could raise the dead. The gods strike him down for it. It's a warning disguised as legend. To cure death is to anger the heavens. Yet temples to Asclepius flourish. Pilgrims sleep within their walls, hoping the god will appear in dreams to heal them. And sometimes they wake miraculously cured. The priests record each case carefully. Returned to life by the god, they write. But if you read between the lines, it's always the same pattern. Warm oils, careful breathing, time. No thunderbolts, no miracles, just persistence and timing, the oldest tools of medicine. The rituals evolve. What begins as experiment becomes liturgy. Priests wrap their words around the actions until the science is hidden inside the prayer. And because no one can explain why some return and others do not, faith fills the gap. Soon, the rituals are no longer about the dead at all. They're about control, the promise that death answers to those who know the right words. It's strange how repetition sanctifies even error. Each generation copies the motions, believing them sacred, forgetting their origin in one man's search for a second breath. By the time the Romans conquer the Mediterranean, resurrection has become theater. In certain festivals, mock funerals are held. Actors lie still, painted white, until priests touch them with fire or oil. Then they rise, to the roar of the crowd. It's spectacle, not faith. But still, the seed of the same obsession that death can be reversed with performance and will. Far to the east, alchemists chase the same dream with metals instead of prayers. They speak of an elixir that can halt decay, restore vitality, lengthen life. They die young from their experiments, poisoned by their own mixtures, but their belief survives, because it never really was about success. It was about the longing, that stubborn refusal to let go of what's gone. The world keeps changing, but the rhythm remains. Observation becomes ritual, ritual becomes myth, myth becomes memory. And each time, someone reaches into the silence and asks if it might answer back. You can almost see them all together, priests, physicians, alchemists, standing around the same table in different centuries, performing the same motions under different names. Lighting fires, mixing herbs, whispering to the motionless. Sometimes, something stirs. Sometimes, it doesn't. Either way, the ritual continues. That's how ideas survive, not through truth, but through repetition. And in that repetition, history builds its ghosts. Outside the temple, dawn begins to bloom. The air is cool and still. Somewhere, the priest steps out, exhausted. He has seen the fingers twitch again tonight. He will not speak of it, but he will remember. And when a student asks, years later, whether the dead can return, he will pause too long before answering. He will say no, but his eyes will say something else. You walk further into that dawn with the priest, through a world still half dreaming, half awake. The torches hiss as he snuffs them one by one, and the smell of smoke and incense lingers like breath that won't quite fade. He believes his night's work is over, but in truth, it's only just begun. Centuries later, the room he worked in will be unearthed by archaeologists. They'll find the table, the bowls, the fragments of bronze tools. They'll measure the walls, photograph the soot on the ceiling, and debate what the chamber was for. Some will say embalming. Others will say surgery. But a few, the quiet ones who linger longer than the rest, will wonder about the strange arrangement of things, the symbols etched on the floor, the traces of burned resins, the faint circular marks where vessels once stood. They will not call it a laboratory. But that's what it was. The deeper they dig, the more these rooms appear, across Egypt, Greece, Mesopotamia, and Rome. Spaces where medicine and mysticism blur so completely that neither word fits anymore. Jars labeled with fragments of words like vita, respiro, spiritus. Resins that still smell faintly sweet when cracked open after 2,000 years. Bodies preserved beyond what decay should allow. And in each of them, a whisper of the same idea, that life can be paused. In one tomb near Saqqara, they find a mummy that seems wrong. No organs removed, mouth slightly open. A fine layer of ash along the nostrils, as though the body exhaled during embalming. It isn't proof, not really. But for those who stand in that silent chamber, it feels like an echo of something familiar. The line between the living and the dead, blurred again by human hands. Other discoveries tell their own uneasy stories. Sarcophagi found with scratches on the inside of the lids. Bodies buried with hands unbound, arms raised as if in struggle. A Roman grave in Gaul where the skeleton lies turned onto its side, jaw open wide, teeth broken against the stone. It's easy now to explain such things with science. Premature burial, misdiagnosis, the fragile signs of life misread. But imagine finding them without that knowledge. Imagine being the first to lift those lids and see the marks. Wouldn't you think they had tried to come back? Every generation that uncovers these traces reads them through its own fears. For the Victorians, it becomes terror of being buried alive. For us, it's fascination, a shiver of recognition that even the ancients stumbled into our nightmares first. But for the people who lived then, it was never a nightmare. It was a possibility. Proof that death could hesitate. In one Greek necropolis, a small tablet is found, carved with words that roughly translate to, "He rose once, may he not rise again." The archaeologists call it a curse. But what if it wasn't anger? What if it was relief, the plea of a family who had already seen a loved one move after burial once before? It's strange how often those two emotions, hope and fear, meet at the same door. You want them back, until they actually come back. And then you wish they hadn't. The line between ritual and protection grows thin. Across early Christian catacombs, bodies are buried with stones placed firmly in their mouths, not as punishment, but insurance, to keep them from calling out. The priests say it's symbolic, a way to silence sin. But symbolism often starts as precaution. And if you look close enough, you can still see the fear beneath the faith. Further east in China, scholars uncover tombs sealed with mercury, not just for preservation, but as a barrier. Mercury was believed to imprison the soul, to weigh it down so it couldn't wander. In other places, nails are driven through limbs before burial. It isn't cruelty, it's certainty. The final guarantee that the sleeper will stay asleep. What all these traces reveal isn't a single belief, but a shared unease, the quiet suspicion that the boundary between life and death is too fragile to trust. And perhaps, in a way, the ancients were right, because even now, the body doesn't die all at once. Cells linger, firing signals long after the heart stops. Muscles twitch, nerves spark. The body remembers life just for a while before surrendering it completely. To see that happening without understanding it, the flutter of fingers, the gasp that comes minutes too late, must have felt like watching a ghost climb back into its own body. No wonder they built rituals around it. No wonder they called it resurrection. There's another story, one that archaeologists tell in hushed voices when the dig lights are low. It comes from a site in southern Italy where they found a row of graves unlike any other. Each contained a body wrapped in cloth, but beside each head was a small clay bowl, still faintly stained. Inside the bowl, traces of poppy, henbane, and opium resin, the same mixture ancient healers once used to still the body before surgery, a sleeping potion, powerful enough to mimic death. But in two of the graves, the skulls were tilted sideways, mouths open, one hand pressed against the earth, as if they'd woken too late. The lead archaeologist wrote later, "It is a cruel thing to see the dead trying to rise." But he added something else, almost an afterthought, and crueler still to realize that someone once tried to make them. It's easy to separate myth from medicine when you read it in a book. Harder when you stand where it happened. When you smell the dry dust of graves, the faint sweetness of ancient herbs, the air heavy with the memory of failure. These were not madmen or monsters. They were the world's first scientists, fumbling toward discovery with trembling hands. And sometimes they succeeded just enough to terrify themselves. You stand there a while longer beneath the low ceiling of a tomb where the torchlight flickers against painted walls. The colors are still bright, ochre, black, crimson. Scenes of harvest, of boats crossing the river of death. The people painted there look calm, almost content. But the longer you look, the more you notice small things. A faint swirl of movement in the eyes, a strange curve in the mouth, as if they are not resting at all, but waiting. You leave quietly, back into the open air. The sun feels wrong after so much time underground. Too clean, too indifferent. You breathe it in anyway. You breathe it in anyway. It tastes faintly of salt and age. And you can't shake the thought that somewhere in all those rituals and mistakes, the ancients were not chasing power. They were chasing mercy. A way to hold on, even for one breath longer. And in doing so, they taught us that the wish to bring someone back is the oldest wish of all. The earth holds those lessons carefully. Bones, tools, the faint trace of hands that tried to undo what time insists on finishing. The more we uncover, the clearer it becomes that the story of resurrection isn't about the supernatural. It's about loneliness, the kind that makes you whisper into the dark and hope it whispers back. And somewhere in that hope, the myths begin to change shape again. They start to belong not to the poor or the desperate, but to those who can afford to challenge death itself. The rich begin to build tombs that are not just for burial, but for waiting. Rooms stocked with food, oil, and offerings, prepared for return, not departure. Because if the common people prayed for one more breath, the powerful began to plan for it. And that slowly, inevitably, leads us toward another world entirely, a place of marble and silver, where death becomes a luxury and life can be delayed through art, wealth, and arrogance. A world where resurrection is no longer a ritual of faith, but a privilege of class. The world above the tombs has changed again. Gone are the mud brick huts and smoky temples of the healers. In their place rise palaces of marble, streets paved with mosaics, gardens perfumed with imported flowers. The smell of incense has been replaced by olive oil and crushed rose petals. And the people who once prayed for one more breath now purchase it, or at least try to. You stand at the gates of a Roman villa, watching servants haul amphorae of wine and baskets of figs through colonnades glimmering in the sun. Somewhere within those halls lies a man who believes he should never die. He is not unique. Among the wealthy, death has become less a fate than a failure of management, a problem to be postponed with gold, comfort, and medicine. Inside, the physician stands ready, adjusting the folds of his spotless tunic. He no longer works in shadowy huts or beside temple altars. He serves the elite, those whose sicknesses are attended to with music, whose fevers are fanned by slaves holding branches of palm. His tools gleam in silver bowls. His herbs are stored in tiny glass jars imported from Alexandria. When he speaks, his voice is soft, measured, rehearsed. He has learned that the rich prefer medicine to sound like philosophy. The patient lies beneath linen sheets embroidered with gold thread. His skin is pale, his lips dry, his breath shallow. He has been dying for days, though no one says it aloud. The room is filled with the smell of lavender and honey, expensive, masking the truth. At the foot of the bed stands the patient's wife, clutching a ring of pearls so tightly that one has cracked. Beside her, a servant fans the air, as if to keep death itself from settling too close. The physician dips his fingers into oil, rubs the man's temples, and whispers about balance and humors. He prescribes sleep, warmth, and faith in the body's natural harmony. But beneath his calm tone lies a quiet panic. He has seen this too many times. The rich may control everything else: land, labor, law, but not this. And that helplessness terrifies them more than any sickness. To soothe them, the physician invents ceremony. He measures the patient's pulse with slow precision, counts the beats aloud as though reciting a spell. He mixes rare herbs that smell mysterious enough to justify their price. He tells the family the signs are promising. They always are, until they aren't. And when the end finally comes, it's quiet, polite, staged almost like a performance. The doctor closes the eyes. The wife whispers a prayer. Servants draw the curtains. Then begins the real work, not of mourning, but of preservation. Because the wealthy do not simply die, they transition. They're washed in wine and milk. Their hair is combed, perfumed, arranged. Their bodies are rubbed with unguents meant to slow decay. Coins are placed on the eyes not just for the ferryman, but for show. Each detail is crafted to prove that dignity can survive even death. Meanwhile, outside these gates, the poor continue to die, as they always have. Abruptly, anonymously, and often in service of the same physicians who treat the rich. The herbs tested on slaves, the bleeding perfected on soldiers, the surgical experiments performed on those too powerless to refuse. Medicine progresses one body at a time, and most of those bodies cannot afford the privilege of ignorance. You can picture the contrast clearly. In one part of the city, the scent of lilies drifts from marble tombs. In another, the stench of open graves mixes with smoke and sewage. The rich sleep in carved stone beds surrounded by offerings of food and gold. The poor are covered in dirt before the breath leaves their lungs. Both end the same way, but only one is told they'll rise again. The irony is sharp. The poor fear being buried alive. The rich pay to ensure they might wake. Some tombs are built like small houses, stocked with water, lamps, even writing tablets. Not because the dead will need them, but because the living imagine they might. Architects design secret vents for air, hinges for lids, traps for intruders. Death becomes an engineering problem. And in their arrogance, the wealthy start to believe they've solved it. At funerals, philosophers recite lines about the immortality of the soul. Musicians play flutes in minor tones, soft enough to sound like breathing. In some ceremonies, the corpse is even made to sit up, propped by hidden supports, so it appears lifelike one last time. To the spectators, it feels comforting, proof that their friend isn't gone, merely resting. To the servants who have seen the truth behind the curtains, it's unsettling. They whisper later that the dead do not like to be moved. Behind these rituals lies a quiet economy of fear. Apothecaries sell elixirs of gold powder and vinegar to strengthen the life force. Traveling quacks promise to restore youth with blood drawn from the young. In one corner of the empire, noble women visit temples where priests claim to transfer sickness into small birds, which are then released into the sky. They go home lighter, convinced. The birds fall dead by evening. For the lower classes, medicine remains trial and error. A handful of herbs, a cold cloth, a prayer to the same gods who dine with the rich. When someone dies, the body is burned quickly, sometimes too quickly. Accidents happen. There are stories of people who sat up on the pyre, coughing through smoke, too late to be saved. Their families call it a miracle gone wrong. Their neighbors call it an omen. The divide between the living rich and the dead poor is not only about wealth, it's about visibility. When a noble wakes from the edge of death, it's a triumph. When a beggar does, it's witchcraft. And yet both are born of the same misunderstanding, the same flicker of breath mistaken for return. One physician, writing in the 1st century, notes that the bodies of the poor are useful for learning. He means it literally. Dissections performed in secret, studies of decomposition, experiments with warmth and herbs. He records that the lower sorts perish easily, but yield much knowledge. You can hear the coldness in the words, a tone that will echo through centuries of medicine. Progress paid for in silence. And still, even he dreams of immortality. In one surviving letter, he writes of his patron, an aging senator obsessed with cheating death. The senator builds a marble tomb with a skylight so that sunlight will reach his face even underground. He hires the physician to develop a method to preserve animation. They experiment with oils, perfumes, even small doses of toxins that slow the pulse to almost nothing. It doesn't work, of course, but the effort itself becomes legend. The senator dies believing his tomb will breathe for him. When that tomb is excavated nearly 2 millennia later, archaeologists find it intact. Air shaft, polished walls, a skeleton still crowned in gold leaf. The ribs are coated in resin. Beside the skull lies a small bronze mirror, positioned to catch the light. They say that when the morning sun strikes the opening above, the reflection glints across the chamber. A trick of engineering that makes it look as if the dead man sighs. For the rich, that illusion is enough. For the poor, reality remains unkind. Mass graves, forgotten names, unmarked stones. No mirrors, no light, no stories of return. Only the quiet knowledge that their bodies will be used for someone else's future cure. You can almost hear the city breathing unevenly, like a lung with one good side and one rotting. On the hills, marble monuments shimmer under the moon. In the valleys, smoke from funeral fires curls through alleys where children sleep beside the sick. Both the rich and poor dream of waking again, but only one can afford to make it look beautiful. And yet, in the end, beauty changes nothing. Death does not care for wealth, or marble, or mirrors. It arrives at both doors the same way, quietly, patiently, certain of its right to enter. The difference is only how long each door tries to stay closed. You stay in that twilight between the marble tombs and the smoky streets, between silk and soot, between the perfumed death of the rich and the forgotten death of the poor. The city feels divided, not just by walls, but by the texture of its silence. In the villas, silence means dignity. In the slums, it means absence. Inside those marble chambers, preservation has become art. The wealthy now hire specialists, not healers, not priests, but something in between. They call them embalmers or restorers of form. Their tools gleam brighter than any surgeon's: bronze needles, glass syringes, brushes made of horsehair. They work by lamplight, their movements slow and precise. Every line on the face must be softened, every trace of decay disguised. The goal is not survival anymore. It's the illusion of it. A noble woman lies on a stone table, her skin pale beneath a film of oil. Two embalmers work in silence, sewing fine threads beneath her jaw to lift the corners of her mouth. She must look serene, as if she's already dreaming of paradise. Her husband watches, nodding approvingly when they replace her eyes with polished stones the color of amber. He will never see those stones again, but it comforts him to know she still seems awake. For those who can afford it, even death is curated. They select fragrances to outlast decay, fabrics that shimmer under lamplight, pigments that mimic life. It's not belief anymore, it's branding, an afterlife designed for visitors, not for gods. Each body becomes a message. Look how well I died. But the craftsmen who perfect these illusions are rarely free. They come from the same neighborhoods that fill the mass graves. They spend their days beautifying corpses they could never afford to bury properly. Their hands smell of camphor and resin. Their own families are wrapped in rags, not silk. They know the secrets of the dead, how easily a face can be rearranged, how quickly flesh betrays wealth. They whisper to each other as they work. The rich do not look any different once the oil cools. One of them, a young embalmer's apprentice named Livius, keeps a small journal hidden under a loose stone. He records the details of every body he restores, which oils lasted longest, which colors of wax best disguised the veins. But between those notes, he writes something else. Thoughts too dangerous to say aloud. He writes about the difference between pretending to live and truly living. He wonders whether those who lie before him adorned and eternal are any less trapped than he is. Sometimes, after a long day, he touches their hands and swears they're still warm. He tells himself, it's the oil. But he's not sure. Word spreads that certain embalmers can make the dead appear almost lifelike, too lifelike. Wealthy patrons begin demanding it. They want their loved ones to look as if they might wake at any moment. To achieve this, the embalmers experiment with herbs and chemicals that tighten the skin, flush the cheeks, even dilate the pupils. It works for a while. Visitors weep, convinced the dead are merely sleeping. But when the illusion fades, it fades suddenly. A breathless stillness, the return of truth. The rich respond the only way they know how, by building better tombs. Soon, tombs become laboratories. Vents for air, drains for moisture, hidden doors for priests to enter and check the condition of the body. What began as superstition turns into early chemistry. They learn that salt draws out water, that resin seals skin, that cold slows decay. Each discovery feels like progress, but it serves the same old dream, not to live forever, only to look like it. Meanwhile, the poor continue to vanish quietly. The same physicians who attend to nobles perform autopsies on beggars in secret. They study how muscles contract after death, how long warmth lingers in the heart. The city's hospitals become both refuge and workshop. Those who enter for healing sometimes never leave. Their bodies are cataloged, dissected, learned from, forgotten. Each new discovery is paid for in silence. Livius sees it all. He moves between the two worlds, from the reeking wards of the poor to the perfumed tombs of the elite. He notices something strange. The bodies of the rich, so carefully preserved, sometimes change after burial. He's called back to reapply oils, to correct swelling or discoloration. But in a few rare cases, he swears the corpses shift slightly, an arm bent, a head turned. He keeps it to himself, afraid to sound mad. But one night, curiosity overcomes him. He stays behind after the others leave, lamp in hand. The tomb is silent except for the sound of dripping water. He kneels beside one of his finest works, the noble woman with amber eyes. He watches, waits. Minutes pass, nothing. Then, as he leans closer, he hears it. A faint sound, soft and hollow, like air escaping from deep inside. The chest rises just once, barely perceptible, then falls. He freezes. His lamp trembles in his hand. The air smells of resin and myrrh, sweet and suffocating. He whispers, "It's the oil," though he doesn't believe it. He tells no one. But the next morning, he resigns. He takes his small journal, seals it with wax, and hides it in the wall of the workshop. Centuries later, it will be found, half rotted, the ink faded. Only one line will still be legible. The dead are patient learners. The line will puzzle historians. Was it metaphor? Madness? No one can say. But to those who work in the field of preservation, it will feel like a warning. Because in truth, every discovery about the body's endurance begins as an act of devotion and ends as a question about control. The rich pursue immortality through art, the poor through faith, and the physicians through experiment. But all of them, in their own way, reach for the same forbidden thing, mastery over what should remain a mystery. As centuries pass, this pursuit changes shape again. The embalmers become anatomists. The tombs become theaters for study. Bodies once dressed in gold are now stripped bare, charted, drawn, learned from, and yet the impulse remains unchanged, to keep death waiting just a little longer. To understand it, so that it can be postponed, maybe even undone. It's strange how persistence can disguise itself as progress. Every new tool, every new technique, every new theory feels like triumph until you realize it's only a more elegant form of the same old wish. The nobleman who built his breathing tomb would have understood the laboratories that will one day replace him. He would have nodded approvingly at their glass jars, their labeled organs, their cold precision. He might even have smiled to see how far his fear has traveled. And somewhere, in the silence of his sealed marble chamber, the air still moves faintly, just enough to keep the mirror glinting when the morning sun slips through. A final illusion. Or maybe not. Because the rich may have tried to buy eternity, but what they created instead was the modern idea of life without rest. The marble fades now, giving way to candlelight and reflection. The centuries grow quieter again. The experiments stop, but the questions remain. And in that stillness, the story returns to where it began, to the strange, stubborn space between living and not, to the thought that refuses to die even when everything else does. The first thing that returns after death is silence. Not the absence of sound, but a kind of suspension, the air holding its breath because no one else can. You can almost hear it, the stillness between one heartbeat and the next, stretched too far to ever recover. The lamp still burns, a soft pool of amber light that glows against the stone wall. Its flame bends whenever the wind creeps through the window slit, as if bowing to the inevitability of what's just happened. The healer doesn't move. He has seen this scene before too often in too many rooms that smelled exactly like this: boiled herbs, old wood, skin, and smoke. Every time, it feels both familiar and slightly altered, as though death were trying new ways to arrive, but never bothering to explain them. He stands over the still body, listening for a sound he knows he will not hear. It isn't habit, it's superstition. The same small superstition that keeps him waiting one more breath, in case life has simply paused instead of ended. When he finally exhales, it's with the soft resignation of a craftsman who knows the material he worked with was always doomed to crack. He closes the patient's eyes with 2 fingers, his hands steady, not out of control, but out of repetition. In the corner, a jar of leeches twitches faintly. One of them still clings to the rim, bloated and confused, as if unsure whom to blame for the failure. Outside, the village hasn't noticed. There's the faint sound of a pot lid rattling somewhere. A dog barking at nothing. A child laughing because children have not yet been told what silence means. The world carries on, not cruelly, but indifferently. That's how it has always coped. The healer takes a cloth from the table and wipes his instruments. The bronze scalpel gleams faintly in the lamplight, its edge catching the moment before the day arrives. There's a ritual to the cleaning, circular motions, never rushed, never delayed. If someone were watching, it might look like prayer. But there is no God in this gesture, only repetition and the small dignity of finishing what one starts. He pours the remaining water into the floor crack, and for a second, the reflection of the flame dances across it. 2 lights, one real, one borrowed, one alive, one about to fade. He stares at it longer than he should. It feels like a metaphor, and he's too tired for metaphors. Then he opens the shutters. The air is gray and damp, carrying the faint metallic smell of rain that hasn't yet fallen. Morning light leaks into the room slowly, and everything looks less important in daylight. The instruments, the herbs, the stains. Even the body looks ordinary, like a shape returned to its elements. He steps outside and blinks at the change of brightness. The street is waking, a woman sweeping, a boy chasing a chicken. The kind of life that resumes automatically, without ceremony. The healer's sandals scuff the stones, and each sound seems to echo more than it should, as though the air itself were exaggerating to remind him he's still here. The small stream behind the house runs clearer today. He crouches by it, washes his hands, watching the stains unwind into the current like smoke dissolving in wind. His reflection ripples. Familiar, aged, the face of someone who has stared at too many endings and found them all equally unfinished. A lock of gray hair falls into his eye. He pushes it back with wet fingers. His movements are slow, mechanical, yet strangely graceful. There's peace in procedure, always has been. Nearby, a bird lands on the rim of a broken pot. It drinks from a puddle, cocks its head at him. Hit and leaves, he wonders, not for the first time, if animals ever mourn. Maybe they do, briefly, efficiently, without writing books about it. That might be the wiser way. The village has begun its rhythm. You can hear the cough of the blacksmith's furnace, the wooden beat of pestles grinding grain, the low hum of gossip drifting from doorway to doorway. Life insists. It always insists. The healer passes the bakery. The smell of bread is almost obscene in its comfort. Sweet, warm, alive. He buys a small loaf and breaks it with his hands as he walks. Crumbs scatter into the dust, and for a moment he imagines the grains of flour and ash trading places. The absurdity of the thought makes him laugh quietly. The baker glances up, startled, not used to seeing humor this early from a man who works with death. At the edge of the marketplace, he stops to rest. The square is still wet from last night's rain. Puddles mirror fragments of the sky. Merchants shout half-heartedly, their voices mixing with the cries of crows overhead. It all feels distant, like a play he's seen too often but can't stop watching. He finds a bench beneath a fig tree. sits, and lets the world unfold around him. A group of children are playing some kind of game involving sticks and a hoop. Their laughter cuts through the morning air. Bright, careless, immune. He can't help but think that somewhere their mothers are already mixing the same herbs he uses, because one of those children will fall sick before the week is over. It's not cynicism. It's just arithmetic. He takes another bite of bread and chews slowly. It tastes plain but good. It, like the kind of flavor that doesn't promise anything except existence. Maybe that's enough. Maybe all these rituals of healing, of burying, of feeding, are simply ways to remind the body that it still belongs here. A stray dog approaches, ribs visible, tail cautious. The healer tosses a piece of crust. The dog catches it midair. For a second, their eyes meet, one pair wise, the other wordless. Then the dog trots away. Mission complete. He leans back against the tree. The bark is rough against his shoulders, grounding him. Above, the branches sway, leaves whispering to one another like conspirators, sharing secrets about seasons. If he listens long enough, it sounds almost like breathing. Maybe that's why people talk about the breath of life. Everything that moves imitates it, even trees. The air grows warmer. Someone nearby is boiling vinegar to disinfect bandages. The smell cuts through the sweetness of the figs. He recognizes the scent instantly. For him, vinegar isn't a condiment. It's memory. It carries the ghost of every wound he ever touched, every fever he ever failed to break. He closes his eyes. Behind his lids, he sees not darkness but color. Amber, red, gray, the palette of medicine and mortality. If someone painted his life, that would be the spectrum. Warmth, loss, repetition. He wonders what will become of all this knowledge when he's gone. The recipes, the diagrams, the half-successes. He never wrote them for glory. He wrote them because forgetting felt like betrayal. Maybe one day another hand will copy them. Maybe someone will mistake his caution for wisdom, his exhaustion for discipline. That's how legends start. Not from greatness, but from someone else's misunderstanding of persistence. He smiles again, faintly. The world keeps misinterpreting survival as heroism. A bell rings in the distance, the sound flat, deliberate. It means another passing. He doesn't ask who. He doesn't need to. Death moves through the village like weather, unpredictable, yet somehow expected. Every ring is an echo of the same question. How long, how often, how many, and every answer is silence. He sits until the shadows shorten. The heat begins to press down, thick and slow. He picks up his satchel, he brushes dust from his robe, and starts walking again. With the unhittable, with the with, not toward any patient, just toward movement itself. Because movement, he has learned, is the only argument against stillness. He turns down a lane he rarely uses, not because it's shorter, but because the stones there are uneven and demand attention. They force his mind to stay with his feet. Every step is a decision. It's a small mercy, this demand from the ground. It interrupts the familiar spiral of questions that usually arrives after a death. The ledger he keeps in his head, lines of "if only" written in ink that never dries. He stops at a cistern and leans over the rim. A damp cool rises from its throat, smelling of mineral and time. There's a rope, frayed and dark, looped through a worn pulley. He lowers the bucket with slow hands and listens to the faint slap when it kisses the water. When he hauls it up, droplets sparkle on the iron hoops, tiny suns that exist for the length of a blink, and then slide away. He drinks. The water is metallic, clean in the way a stone is clean. It tastes like the kind of honesty he appreciates. Nothing added, nothing promised. On the way back, he passes the small shrine people use when they want luck without the commitment of a temple visit. The offerings are modest: a fig, a twist of wool, a coin so thin it looks transparent at the edges. Someone has left a sprig of rue. He knows the plant well. He crushes a leaf between finger and thumb and brings the smell to his face. Bitter, sharp, medicinal, the quiet declaration that some things in this world are trying to help, even if they don't always know how. At his door, he hesitates. Inside is the room of instruments and attempts. Outside is the day's ordinary labor. He chooses inside because routine is gravity and he is tired of floating. He sets the satchel on the table and spreads its contents: 2 lengths of linen, a spool of gut thread, a roll of soft leather for bandages, the bronze spoon with the shallow dent that makes it perfect for measuring powders. He straightens each item as if preparing for a lesson, and perhaps he is a lesson for himself about order in a world that keeps smudging the edges. He lights the lamp again, not for light, but for company. The flame takes with a small complaint, then steadies, a quiet pupil that understands its task. Beside it, he opens his journal. For a long moment, he simply reads older entries, replaying the voice he had on better days. Brisk, certain, almost cheerful in its listing of symptoms and responses. Compression of chest, increased warmth, wine infusion, steadied tremor, breath paused and returned, time uncounted. He hears the steady drum of hope that used to score his work, the measured optimism of a craftsman who believed technique could outrun consequence. He dips the pen and writes a line in the margin of a page from years ago. Pauses are not reversals. Do not confuse the kindness of a body delaying its departure with an invitation to bar the door. The sentence looks like it has been waiting there the whole time. He remembers a patient, a girl whose fever burned low and steady for days, the kind of fire that doesn't alarm the neighbors and destroys the house anyway. When her breath thinned to thread, he rubbed her limbs with warm oil and spoke into her ear about bread and sunrise, about the market noise, about the stupid dog that slept with its head in the doorway. Not prayers. He isn't sure anymore what counts as a prayer, but an inventory of reasons. She returned for 3 days. Then she left. The family always tells the story as if those 3 days were his victory. He doesn't correct them. Let them have the warmth. He knows what it was. A tide that lingered on the sand to enjoy the pattern of shells, then retreated all the same. He considers how many times he has been accused of arrogance. It never feels like arrogance to him. It feels like tidying. He sees a life that has fallen out of alignment with itself, and he tries to nudge it back into the grooves. When it slides away anyway, he is not angry, only aware that grooves wear down, that the world is full of small slants, that everything leans toward quiet if you give it time. From a shelf, he takes a small clay jar with a broken lip. Inside is powdered willow bark, pale and shy. He holds it, thinking of the tree at the river, the way its branches droop like tired arms after a long day. He has learned to respect plants that look exhausted. They often carry relief inside them. He measures a pinch into the bronze spoon and tastes the dust with the tip of his tongue, as if reminding his mouth what mercy feels like. A knock at the door. He doesn't answer at first. The sound echoes like a question he hasn't prepared for. When he opens, it's the apprentice, the younger one, who always stands as if he's waiting to be told where to put his hands. There is dirt on his cheek in a neat vertical line, the mark of someone who scratched an itch while carrying something heavy. "Should I clean the instruments?" the apprentice asks. The healer nods and gestures, and together they move about the room in gentle choreography. Water poured, cloths wrung, metal wiped to dull mercy. The apprentice glances at the journal. May I copy the diagram from yesterday? If you promise not to correct the drawing of the heart, the healer says, it is ugly and accurate. The apprentice smiles, a small private moment that curls the corner of his mouth. They work in silence for a time, the friendly kind of silence that doesn't mind being broken. Master, the apprentice says finally, when you listen for breath after breath has stopped, what do you hope to hear? The healer considers. Not a miracle, he says. Only a reminder. Sometimes the body remembers itself and comes back to fetch something it forgot. What could a body forget? The same things we do, he says. To swallow, to sigh, to let go gently. The apprentice thinks about that and nods, the way you nod when you don't understand, but you know the understanding will arrive later, like a letter that took the long road. They set the instruments to dry on the sill, a little army of tools taking the air. Sunlight turns the edges into thin gold. The healer looks at them and tries to imagine all the hands they will pass through after his are done. Steady hands, clumsy hands, hands that tremble because they are kind, hands that do not tremble because they are not paying attention. He murmurs something that might be a blessing, though it is addressed to bronze. He unrolls a strip of linen and runs his fingers along the weave. When he was young, cloth meant clothing. Later it meant binding. Now it means time. He has measured hours by how quickly wet linen dries on a line, how fast it stains, how much stiffness it accrues before it must be burned. There is a craft to living with the materials you use to fight against endings. They will always tell you what you can ask of them if you let them speak. The apprentice lights a second lamp without being told. The room gains another sun. Between the two flames, shadows intersect like thoughts crossing a mind on their way to somewhere else. The healer watches the complicated geometry they draw on the wall and remembers the diagrams he has seen in old treatises, circles within circles, arrows pointing toward imagined centers. How dearly the human mind loves a map. How stubbornly the body refuses to be a country. He reaches for a folded sheet, the letter he never sent. It is addressed only to friend, because he could not decide which friend could bear it. He reads the first lines aloud, testing the weight. I have begun to suspect that my craft is less about saving lives than about escorting them back to the door when they wander too far to find it on their own. He stops there. It's enough for now. He sets the letter aside and doesn't put something on top of it. He wants it to keep breathing. Midday presses in, a soft hand on the nape. The apprentice leaves with promises to return before twilight. The room settles into the kind of quiet that has furniture in it, not empty, just paste. The healer takes down a bundle of dried thyme and worries loose a few brittle leaves. He crushes them in his palm and scatters them in the brazier. A familiar smell lifts and unfolds. Green at first, then warm. It smells like hunger solved and fever soothed, and floors scrubbed. It smells like attempts. On the back wall hangs a small board where he's been collecting words, not from books, but from the mouths of people in the moments they forgot to lie. He writes them in chalk when he returns from a visit, phrases that seem to carry more weight than they should. It doesn't hurt, it just takes. She was laughing yesterday. I thought breath was forever. Some days he erases the entire board with the heel of his hand and starts again, because the words feel too heavy for the small nails that hold the board in place. He sits. He lets his shoulders drop the way you set down a basket you didn't realize was heavy. It is then that the doubts arrive, polite as visitors who remove their shoes at the door. He never fights them. He hosts them. He hosts them. He pours them a little water. He asks them what they would like to know. They always ask the same questions. Was this necessary? Did you do harm by delaying the farewell? Was your refusal to accept the first stillness an act of care or of vanity? He answers with the truth he has, which is not much. I stayed because staying is what I know how to do. I listened because listening is the last useful skill we have when our hands have run out of work. I asked the body to remember itself. It chose not to. From a drawer he retrieves a small wooden box. Inside is a collection of oddities that mean little to anyone else. A bead of hardened resin the color of old honey, a tooth worn flat by a life of grinding, a tiny wax tablet covered in nearly illegible numbers, a piece of thread that once held a charm around a wrist. He touches each object as if checking a pulse, remembering the lives they belonged to, the rooms where they fell to the floor, the hands that fidgeted with them while someone tried not to be afraid. He takes the wax tablet and reads the digits. They are times intervals between last breath and last movement, recorded with the care of a man who hoped numbers might negotiate what words had failed to. Some intervals are long enough to plant a doubt. Some are so short they almost look like mercy. He adds today's numbers with a blunt stylus, pressing just hard enough to groove the wax, not so hard the stylus squeals. The math does not comfort him, but it positions the day inside something bigger than mood. A shadow moves across the threshold. For half a heartbeat, he thinks it is a visitor, but it's simply the sun changing its mind about the angle of the world. The room cools by a degree. He feels it on the skin of his forearms, that fine shift from warm to almost warm that makes a person think of blankets and of endings. He rubs his arms, not from chill, but as a signal to himself. Continue, continue. He sets a fresh page on the table. At the top, he writes a title, On the Nature of Pauses. Below it, in a script so steady, it looks like someone else's hand, he composes sentences that feel like stepping stones in a shallow stream. Breath is not a switch, it is a rope. There are knots in it we cannot see. Sometimes the rope slips, sometimes it holds. Sometimes we tug too hard. He lifts his pen and waits to hear if the silence will offer him another thought. It doesn't, which is fine. Silence is already a thought if you have the patience to let it finish. Afternoon draws its long line across the floor. He watches it travel, a slow pilgrim making its way toward the table leg. Light measures things with more honesty than clocks. He has learned to trust it, the way it points to dust, 1 hour, and forgives it the next. A neighbor appears at the door with a bowl covered by a cloth. She doesn't step in. She stands at the edge as if respecting a threshold she cannot name. I made soup, she says. He takes it with both hands. They talk about the weather as if it were a patient. She leaves before the conversation can become about anything else. He lifts the cloth, barley, onion, a generosity of salt. He eats standing, a few spoonfuls only, then sets the rest aside for later or for never. Toward evening, the apprentice returns. His face is flustered, but not with panic, with purpose. There's a man at the river, he says. Fishermen. They think he drowned and then didn't. The healer's body answers before his mind does. His hand finds the satchel. The lamp's flame rises when he passes it, as if surprised to be needed again. He takes his cloak, though the air is still gentle. Better to bring warmth than to need it and have to borrow it from the night. On the footpath, they move quickly, but not frantically. Speed wastes breath. Steadiness saves it. The apprentice walks half a step ahead, then half a step behind, the awkward dance of someone who wants to help and doesn't yet know how to measure his own pace against another's. They reach the riverbank and find a small knot of people, a woman wringing her hands into a shape that does not exist, a boy with a rope he never got to throw, 2 men arguing about who was right when there is nothing to be right about. The fisherman lies on the bank, his skin the color of the sky, just before rain. His eyes are closed. His chest is still, The healer kneels and listens with the side of his face near the mouth, the old method that looks like intimacy and is only skill. He feels for the rope of breath and finds only wet. He rubs the sternum as if asking the heart to step outside for a moment. He presses down, again and again, not with urgency, but with persuasion. The body answers with water and a cough so thin it could be mistaken for a breeze. Then silence again. He keeps pressing, keeps shaping air into the idea of return. A rattle, a swallow, a pause that is not an end. Then the smallest breath, the kind a child takes in the first minute of life, when it is still deciding whether it likes the world. No one cheers. They exhale, all at once, like a room deciding it can hold people again. The healer keeps his hands where they are, not trusting triumph. A full minute passes. Another. Breath becomes a habit. The body remembers. Only then does he step back. He does not look at the faces around him. He looks at the fisherman's hands. They open, close. They reach for nothing in particular, which is to say, they reach for living. Someone says, "You brought him back." The healer shakes his head. He left the door unlatched. He says softly, "I pushed it." They carry the man toward his house, a slow procession with no ritual except caution. On the path home, the apprentice tries not to grin and fails. The healer doesn't correct him. Let the boy keep his joy. The world will edit it soon enough. Instead, he says, "Remember how long the pause was." The apprentice nods. "Count it again later." The healer adds, "And write it down." They reach the lane where the stones are uneven. The sky has turned the blue that makes oil lamps desirable. The healer feels the day's weight arrange itself across his shoulders in a pattern that nearly makes sense. At the door, he pauses, not to pray, not to marvel, but to promise himself he will check on the fisherman at dawn. Return is a verb that requires maintenance. Inside, the room takes him back as if no time has passed since he left. The lamp's flame steadies. The instruments rest. On the table, the page titled "On the Nature of Pauses" waits with the patience of paper. He sits, picks up the pen, and writes beneath the last line. Some pauses hold a door, some hold a memory, some hold a choice. He lifts the pen again and lets the quiet decide whether more belongs there. It does, but not yet. He can feel it arriving like weather from a long way off, taking its time, which is the only honest way to arrive at anything worth keeping. He looks toward the window where night is thinking about being night and the day refuses to admit it has ended. The hinge between them creaks, the small sound a room makes when it moves from one kind of light to another. He breathes once, then again, then waits to see what the next breath asks of him, willing to follow it wherever it wants to go next. The next morning arrives, as if unsure whether it should. The sky is colorless at first. Not gray, not blue, just undecided. He wakes before the light fully reaches the shutters. Sleep had visited him briefly, politely, and left without making a mess. He sits up, listens. The quiet isn't total. There's always something moving, even in stillness. A shifting of dust, a sigh of timber, the dull thud of a heart that hasn't yet decided it's tired. He stretches, his joints answering with small, honest noises. Outside, a rooster calls with the conviction of someone who has never failed at anything. He almost laughs. Then he reaches for his satchel again. It waits where he left it, obedient as a thought that refuses to age. The walk to the fisherman's hut is shorter in morning light. The path looks less tragic now, just a path, damp and ordinary. He meets the boy who held the rope the night before. The boy nods, half proud, half shy. The man is breathing, he says, Slow, but he's breathing. The healer places a hand on the boy's shoulder. Not to bless, not to comfort, but to acknowledge participation in the conspiracy of persistence. Good, he says. Don't stare at him too much. Breathing doesn't like attention. Inside, the fisherman sleeps, ribs rising like the sea when it remembers itself. His wife keeps a hand on his ankle, as if making sure the tether between body and world hasn't slipped again. The healer checks the pulse, light as tapping on glass, then nods and leaves a small bundle of herbs on the table. For the cough, he says. She doesn't thank him. She doesn't need to. Gratitude feels redundant when you're still testing whether reality will stay put. Outside, the river moves with that same impartial rhythm. He squats near the water, fills a small vial, and corks it. The surface reflects his face for a moment. Older, yes, but softer than yesterday. He suspects the difference is not in his features, but in the angle from which he views them. He stands, stretches, watches mist lift off the far reeds, and feels the first true appetite he's known in days. Back in the village, the air smells of wet clay and roasted barley. Someone waves, someone else doesn't. It's enough. He stops by the market stall for another loaf, and when the baker hands it over, their fingers brush a simple exchange of warmth, the smallest proof of shared existence. He eats on the walk home again, crumbs falling in the same pattern as yesterday. But today, the act feels less like ritual and more like sustenance. The birds seem louder, the dogs less desperate. Nothing has changed except the way he notices it. It occurs to him that recovery might not belong only to the sick. At his door, he hesitates again. This threshold, this invisible gate between trying and resting. He steps inside. The lamp is still there, though unlit. The instruments dry. The pages waiting. He feels a quiet gladness that the world doesn't rearrange itself when he leaves. It trusts him enough to stay consistent. He sets the vial of river water beside his notes. He will study it later, or maybe he won't. Not everything that can be measured needs to be. He sits, dips his pen, and adds to the essay. Sometimes the pause lengthens into life again. Sometimes it is the listener who returns, not the patient. He pauses, smiling at his own phrasing. The lamp behind him, though unlit, catches a beam of daylight on its glass. The reflected gold makes a trembling circle on the wall. He watches it wobble, a light without flame, a heart without body, and feels the faint dizziness of understanding that the line between living and remembering is no line at all, just a shimmer that moves when we move, disappears when we stare too hard. He leans back, chair creaking. For a moment, the sounds of the house become music, wood expanding, air sighing through shutters, the slow percussion of his own pulse against his sleeve. It's enough to fill the morning, enough to believe that continuing is its own craft. He writes again, in smaller script this time, as if whispering to himself through the page. There is no mastery of life, there is only attendance. He sets the pen down, folds his hands on the table, and lets the thought linger, unpunctuated, waiting for whatever comes next. He stays that way for a long time, watching dust drift in the late light like tiny unhurried souls, each one completing the same slow circle through the room. Outside, a wind moves through the fig tree, not strong enough to rattle the shutters, just enough to remind him the world continues to exhale. He closes the journal, but doesn't tie it. A book should always be able to breathe. The pen lies beside it. It's tipped dark with yesterday's ink. He'll clean it tomorrow or the day after. Some tools work better when they remember what they've written. The lamp he lights is gentle this time, No smoke, no struggle. A small, obedient flame that listens more than it burns. Its glow reaches the shelf where the jars rest, catching on glass, turning the room gold in slow ripples. It looks almost like the inside of a heartbeat. He rises, moves to the doorway, and looks out toward the river. The sky has already traded its color for distance. Somewhere, another healer is still awake, another lamp trembling against the same quiet. He imagines the faint grid of those lights stretching across the world, a constellation of people trying not to lose what little warmth they've borrowed. He smiles, not because it's over, but because for tonight, it doesn't need to be. He blows gently at the lamp. The flame leans, flickers, and bows itself out. The dark folds around him like familiar linen. And if you're still awake, thank you for staying. Let your breathing slow. Let the sound of the night do the rest. History will keep its watch a while longer. If you enjoyed drifting through history tonight, consider subscribing before you fall asleep. It helps this little corner of the internet keep growing, one quiet story at a time. And if you're still awake, leave a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from. I love seeing the map fill up with night owls. Sleep well and good night.